If I had known that the family holiday I paid for would end with me being told not to come, I would never have called them my family. I did not argue. I did not ask why. I did not even cry, because the sentence was delivered too calmly. It might be better if you don't come. Not shouted, not explained, just placed in front of me like a final decision that had already been agreed on by everyone else. I was standing in my kitchen when I heard it. The kettle was still boiling. My suitcase was half packed. Train tickets to Scotland were already in my email. And suddenly I realized something that made my chest go cold. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. This was a decision made without me. I had paid for the accommodation. I had booked the travel. I had covered the costs so the whole family could have a peaceful holiday together. And yet, I was the one being quietly removed. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had done too much. Too helpful, too reliable, too easy to exclude. In that moment, I understood what it truly means to be unwanted in a family that smiles politely while pushing you out the door. They did not tell me to stay away. They suggested it. They did not say I was not welcome. They implied I would ruin the atmosphere, and that was worse. Because in families like this, nothing is ever said directly. Everything is done softly, politely, with a smile. I remember holding my phone and thinking, if I accept this quietly, I will disappear forever. So I did not fight them. I did not confront them. I did not beg to belong. I did something else. I stepped back. I stayed silent. And I changed everything. Not with shouting, not with revenge that leaves bruises, but with something far more unsettling: control. If you have ever paid the price of belonging only to be told you do not belong at all, then stay with me. And before we continue, comment number 1 below if you want to hear this story until the very end, because this is the moment everything began. Before everything fell apart, there was nothing dramatic about our lives. We were not rich. We were not struggling. We were simply a family that looked, from the outside, comfortably ordinary. We lived in a quiet part of London, a street where neighbours nodded but rarely spoke, where parcels were left safely by the door, where evenings sounded the same everywhere, cutlery touching plates, television murmuring in the background, low conversations drifting from one room to another. There was comfort in that predictability, a sense that things were settled, that nothing unexpected was waiting around the corner. The idea of the holiday came up over dinner, not during an argument, not during a celebration. Just one of those conversations that feels harmless at the time. My mother-in-law mentioned that it would be nice for the family to spend time together. She said everyone had been busy, that people were drifting, that a change of scenery might do us good. My husband agreed almost immediately. He said work had been stressful, that a break would help everyone reset. Scotland was mentioned casually, not with excitement, not with planning, just as a suggestion. A week away, fresh air, space, something slower than London. No one looked at me when the costs were discussed. They never had to. Later that evening, I opened my laptop, not because anyone asked me to, but because that was what I always did when something needed organising. I started with the train routes, London to Edinburgh, early morning departure, enough time to arrive before dark. I checked the return times, considered luggage allowances, chose seats without really thinking about it. Then I moved on to accommodation, scrolling, comparing, filtering. I avoided anything that felt too extravagant. I knew that would be criticised. At the same time, I did not choose anything too basic. That would also be noticed. Eventually, I found a small wooden house near a loch. Quiet, detached. Enough bedrooms for everyone. It felt safe, neutral, uncontroversial. I booked it. The confirmations began to arrive almost immediately. Emails stacking neatly in my inbox. Tickets, receipts, reservation details, payment summaries. Everything looked tidy, organized, under control. There was a quiet satisfaction in that, the feeling of completing something before it became a problem, of making sure there would be no last-minute stress. That had always been my role. I was the one who remembered birthdays, the one who added reminders to the calendar, the one who checked details twice so no one else had to. At work, that made me reliable. At home, it made me expected. I showed the details to my husband the next morning. He smiled. He said it looked perfect. He said I always knew how to handle these things. I took that as appreciation. At the time, it felt like praise. Now I understand it differently. When I showed the house to my mother-in-law, she approved quickly. She commented on the view, on the size of the kitchen. She said it would be nice for family photos. That was all. There were no questions about the cost, no offer to contribute, no discussion, just acceptance. In the days leading up to the trip, life continued as usual. Work deadlines, laundry cycles, groceries carried home in reusable bags. Each evening, I heard the distant sound of trains passing, a reminder of movement, of people going somewhere. I printed the tickets, placed them neatly in a folder, added reminders to my calendar. I checked the weather forecast in Scotland more than once. Rain, cloud, clear spells, nothing unexpected. The suitcase stayed open in the corner of the bedroom. I folded clothes slowly, methodically, not in a hurry. There was time. I imagined quiet mornings, coffee by the window, everyone sitting around the table without rushing anywhere. I imagined conversations that did not feel tense, silence that felt comfortable, a week where no one needed anything from me. That was the picture I carried in my head. Looking back, there were small moments that did not sit quite right, but at the time they felt too minor to question. A conversation that stopped when I entered the room, a decision mentioned only after it had already been made. Plans discussed without asking if I was available. I told myself that was normal. Families were like that. Not everything needed my input. I had married into their family. It was my job to adapt. The emails kept coming. Final confirmations, payment receipts, everything settled. The trip was real. It was happening. And at that point, there was nothing about it that felt unsafe. Nothing that suggested I would not be there. Nothing that prepared me for how easily a place could be taken away. I never thought of myself as generous. I thought of myself as responsible. There is a difference. Generosity expects gratitude. Responsibility expects nothing. And I had learned over time to expect nothing. I worked in finance, not the loud kind, not the kind people boast about at dinner parties. My job was quiet, structured, numbers, deadlines, decisions made before anyone else realized they were necessary. It suited me. I liked knowing that things were handled, that problems were solved before they turned into emergencies, that someone had already thought 5 steps ahead. At work, people trusted me. They relied on me. And when something went wrong, they came to my desk without panic. At home, it was much the same. I was the one who paid attention, the one who noticed when something needed doing, the one who stepped in before anyone had to ask. Not because I was told to, but because it felt easier than watching things fall apart. When I started covering family expenses, it did not feel like a sacrifice. It felt practical. If I could afford it, why make it complicated? If I could help, why hesitate? That was how it began. Small things, groceries, train tickets, a meal out that someone else had forgotten to budget for. No one ever said thank you in a way that lingered, but no one objected either. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, my role became fixed. I was the one who would handle it. I told myself that this was what being part of a family meant, that contribution was a form of belonging, that if I gave enough, I would eventually feel settled. I did not feel taken advantage of. I felt useful, and that can be dangerous, because when usefulness replaces appreciation, you do not notice the shift until it is complete. My husband never asked me directly to pay for things. He did not need to. He would mention something in passing, a bill, an expense, a plan that needed funding, and I would fill the silence. "It's fine," I would say. "I'll sort it." He would look relieved, grateful perhaps, but never uncomfortable, as if this arrangement made perfect sense. His mother was even less direct. She spoke in assumptions, not requests. "It will be easier if you handle that. You're better with money. You understand these things." None of it sounded unkind. That was the problem, because nothing feels wrong when it is wrapped in reason. I never once thought, one day, they will use this against me. I thought the opposite, that my willingness would protect me, that it would secure my place. When the holiday came up, my reaction was instinctive. I did not pause. I did not calculate what it meant. I simply did what I always did. I organized. I paid. I made sure everything was covered. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, not because I wanted control, but because it felt natural, like breathing. I told myself that families functioned because someone carried the weight, and I was strong enough to do it. I believed that strength would be recognized, respected. What I did not understand yet was how easily strength can be mistaken for silence. I did not complain. I did not set conditions. I did not ask for reassurance, and because I did not ask, no one thought to offer it. From the outside, I must have looked calm, capable, unbothered, like a woman who would never make a scene, never push back, never disrupt the balance, and perhaps that is what made the next part so easy for them. If you are listening to this and thinking, "She will let it go, she will swallow it, she will stay quiet," you are not alone. Most people thought the same. Before we continue, comment number 2 below if you recognize this pattern, or comment the word loyal if you have ever carried more than your share, believing that one day it would be enough. Our marriage did not fall apart with shouting. There were no slammed doors, no dramatic ultimatums, no nights spent sleeping on opposite sides of the bed. That was the strange part. From the outside, we looked stable, quiet, reasonable. People often told me how lucky I was. They said my husband was calm, that he was easy to live with, that we never argued in public, and they were right. We did not argue. We avoided. My husband was not a cruel man. He was not aggressive. He never raised his voice at me. Instead, he withdrew. When something felt uncomfortable, he softened his tone. When tension appeared, he found a way to step aside. When a decision needed to be made, he waited for someone else to make it. Usually, that someone was me. In the early days, I mistook this for kindness. I told myself he was gentle, that he did not like conflict, that he valued peace. It took me a long time to understand the difference between peace and avoidance. If I asked him a direct question, he rarely answered immediately. He paused, looked thoughtful, as if weighing his words very carefully. "What do you think we should do?" he would say. At first I appreciated that. It felt like respect, like partnership. Later I noticed something else. Whatever answer I gave, that answer became the final decision. And whatever consequences followed, they were never his responsibility. When his mother disagreed with something, he never defended me. He did not oppose her either. He simply went quiet. He would look at me instead. A small glance, a silent request. "Please handle this. Please do not make it difficult. Please keep things calm." Sometimes he said it out loud, not sharply, almost apologetically. "Can we not turn this into a big thing?" I would nod, because I did not want to be the difficult one. There were moments when his silence felt heavier than anger, like the evening his mother criticized the way I had organized a family dinner. Nothing overt, just comments wrapped in politeness. "That's an interesting choice. I usually do it differently." I waited. I expected him to say something. He reached for his glass, took a sip, looked at his phone. Later, when we were alone, I asked quietly, "Did you hear what she said?" He hesitated, then replied, "She didn't mean it badly. It's just how she is." That sentence became a pattern. Another time, his mother made a decision about our weekend plans without asking me. She announced it at breakfast, as if it had already been agreed. I looked at him. He avoided my eyes. When we were in the car later, I said, "It would have been nice to be asked." He sighed, not angrily, just tiredly. I didn't want to make it awkward. Awkward for whom, I wondered. But I said nothing. Money made these moments sharper. When bills arrived, he placed them neatly on the table. Did not comment. Did not suggest splitting them. He waited. If I picked them up, the conversation ended. If I hesitated, the silence stretched. Not pressure, not expectation, just quiet. Eventually I would speak. "I'll take care of it." Relief crossed his face. Not gratitude, relief. As if the problem had dissolved, as if it had never belonged to him. Sometimes, late at night, I tried to talk, not to accuse, just to understand. "Do you ever feel uncomfortable with this?" I asked once. "With me paying for so much?" He stared at the ceiling, longer than necessary, then said, "You're just better at it than I am." That was his explanation. That was the end of the conversation. Another night, I asked him if he thought his mother treated me fairly. He turned onto his side, faced away from me. "You know how she is. It's easier if we don't challenge her." Easier for whom, I wondered. But I did not ask, because every time I pushed, he retreated. And I learned, slowly, that pushing meant being alone. There was no cruelty in his behavior. That made it harder to name. There was only absence, a refusal to stand anywhere solid. Over time, I stopped expecting support. I stopped asking questions that led nowhere. I stopped sharing thoughts that required effort to hold. I adjusted. I became quieter, more careful, more efficient. I learned how to phrase things so they sounded harmless, how to swallow reactions before they surfaced, how to make myself smaller without realizing I was doing it. From the outside, our marriage looked peaceful. Inside, it felt increasingly empty. He relied on me to smooth things over, to absorb discomfort, to keep the balance intact. And I did it, again and again, not because I was weak, but because I believed that this was what commitment looked like. I told myself that all marriages had compromises, that not everything needed to be discussed, that stability mattered more than fairness. And for a long time, that belief held. Until silence stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like erasure. At that point, I still did not plan to fight. I did not imagine leaving. I did not see revenge in my future. I simply felt tired. Tired of carrying conversations alone. Tired of making decisions no one wanted to own. Tired of being the one who stayed steady while everything leaned on me. I did not know yet what I would do, but something had already shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, quietly, just like everything else in our marriage. If my husband disappeared when things became uncomfortable, his mother did the opposite. She stepped forward, not loudly, not aggressively, but with certainty. From the moment I married into the family, she made one thing very clear. She did not see herself as controlling. She saw herself as correct. She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she was preserving standards, traditions, order. And because she never raised her voice, it was difficult to accuse her of anything. Everything she did was wrapped in reason. She did not criticize directly. She observed. She did not demand. She suggested. She did not exclude. She rearranged. At first it was subtle, small comments delivered with a smile, a tone that sounded helpful rather than judgmental. "You might find it easier if you do it this way. This is how we usually handle these things. It's just more appropriate." Each sentence landed softly, but each one moved me slightly out of place. She often spoke about family values, about how important it was to keep things harmonious, how appearances mattered. We don't need unnecessary tension. People notice these things. It reflects on all of us. When she said these things, she looked at me calmly, not accusing, almost instructing, as if she were helping me learn my role. She never once said I was wrong. She simply behaved as if there was a correct way, and I had not quite mastered it yet. And because she believed this so deeply, she expected others to agree. My husband did. Whenever she spoke, he nodded, rarely interrupting, never correcting. If I hesitated, she noticed immediately. She would pause, smile slightly, and continue. Of course, you can do what you like, but this is what works best for the family. The word was used often, always as justification, never as invitation. Decisions were made in advance, plans announced rather than discussed. I was informed, not consulted. When I tried to contribute, she acknowledged it politely, then redirected. That's one option. But we've already decided. There was no hostility in her voice, no edge. That was what made it so effective. Disagreeing with her felt unreasonable, almost rude. Because she always sounded reasonable, she often framed her opinions as concern. For me, for the family, for how things would look. You don't want people talking. It's better if we keep things simple. Trust me, this avoids problems. Problems she never named. Consequences she never explained. Just an unspoken rule that compliance led to peace. And peace, I was told, was the goal. She liked to remind me how much she had done for her family, how many sacrifices she had made, how difficult things had been when she was younger. I learned to put the family first. That's what marriage requires. She said these things as facts, not as complaints, and because of that, it felt inappropriate to challenge her. If I ever looked uncertain, my husband would intervene quietly. She's only trying to help. She knows how these things work. That phrase appeared often. How these things work. As if family life were a system with fixed rules, and my role was simply to adapt. Over time, I noticed a pattern. Whenever there was potential conflict, she positioned herself as the mediator, the reasonable one, the calm one, and I became the variable. If I disagreed, I was sensitive. If I questioned something, I was overthinking. If I stayed silent, I was agreeable. Either way, she remained correct. One evening, during dinner, she commented on how lucky I was to have a stable life. You're very fortunate. Not everyone has this support. I looked around the table. At the decisions I did not make, the plans I did not shape, the expectations placed gently but firmly on my shoulders. And I realized something unsettling. She truly believed she was kind. She believed that by guiding me, by shaping my behavior, by smoothing my edges, she was helping me fit in. She did not see control. She saw care. And that made everything more complicated. Because how do you argue with someone who believes they are doing the right thing? There were moments when I felt myself disappearing. Not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually. My opinion softened. My preferences faded. My presence adjusted itself to avoid friction. And each time I adapted, the family appeared more harmonious, at least on the surface. I told myself this was temporary, that once things settled, I would feel more secure. I told myself this was what compromise looked like, but somewhere underneath, a quiet discomfort grew, a sense that I was being organized rather than included. If you are listening and feeling uneasy right now, that is intentional, because this is the part where many people stop questioning, where they accept the rules, where they tell themselves this is normal. Before we go any further, comment number 3 below if you recognize this kind of control, because the most dangerous authority is the one that believes it is being kind. Looking back, I understand why I ignored the signs. None of them felt serious enough to stop everything. None of them arrived with urgency. They were not warnings, they were suggestions. Small moments, easy to dismiss, almost harmless. The first came a few days before the trip. I was in the living room, sorting through emails on my phone, confirmations, receipts, nothing unusual. My husband was on the other side of the room, scrolling quietly. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, did not answer immediately, stood up instead and walked toward the kitchen. The call was short. Too short to be meaningful, too long to be nothing. When he came back, I looked up and asked, "Everything okay?" He nodded. "Just Mum." That was all he said. He did not sound annoyed. He did not sound concerned. He sounded settled. I returned to my emails. The second moment happened the following morning. I mentioned the packing list over breakfast. Nothing dramatic, just practical details. "I'll bring the documents, you've got the charges." He nodded again, but his attention drifted. He stared past me for a second, then said, "Do you really need to bring all of that?" It was not a challenge. It was not criticism. Just a question. I smiled. Better to be prepared. He did not argue. He did not agree. He simply said, "Right," and changed the subject. Later that day, I noticed something small but strange. The shared calendar on my phone had been updated. The trip was still there. The dates unchanged, but one detail had been adjusted. The note section, a line added and then removed. I could not tell what it had said, only that something had been edited. I told myself it was nothing, an accidental tap, a mistake. People change plans all the time. The third moment was quieter. That evening, his mother sent a message to the family group chat, a general update. Nothing specific. "Looking forward to next week. It will be good for everyone," everyone replied with polite enthusiasm. Smiling emojis, short confirmations. My husband did not reply, I noticed, but I did not comment. When I asked him about it later, casually, he shrugged. "I'll respond later." He never did. None of this felt alarming on its own. Each moment had an explanation, a reason. That was what made it so easy to ignore. There were no raised voices, no accusations, no visible tension, just a slight sense of being out of sync, as if a conversation had begun somewhere without me. I became more aware of pauses, of glances that did not include me, of plans that sounded finished before I heard them. But every time I questioned myself, I found a way to dismiss it. I told myself I was tired, overthinking, reading into things that did not matter. I reminded myself that families communicate differently, that not everything needed my involvement, that trust meant letting go. One afternoon, while folding clothes, I asked him something simple. "What time are we leaving on Monday?" He hesitated, just for a second. "I'll check." That response stayed with me longer than it should have, not because it was wrong, but because he usually knew. Later, I overheard part of a conversation, not intentionally, just passing through the hallway. His voice was low, measured. "I know. She doesn't need to worry about that." I stopped walking, stood still, listened. Then he laughed softly, a sound meant to reassure. When I entered the room, he ended the call, looked up, smiled. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just work." It was believable, so I believed it. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the day, not searching for evidence, just noticing a feeling, a subtle shift, like furniture moved slightly out of place. Everything still worked, nothing had collapsed, but something felt different. I thought about asking more questions, about pressing him, about naming the discomfort, but I did not, because there was still no proof, no clear problem, no moment that justified doubt. And I had learned over time that doubt without evidence made me look unreasonable. So I stayed quiet. I told myself that trust meant patience, that clarity would come naturally, that if something were truly wrong, it would be obvious. I did not realize then that the most effective betrayals never announce themselves. They arrive gently, in half sentences, in edits you cannot see. in decisions that feel already made. By the end of that week, the feeling had not gone away. It had settled. Not fear, not anger, just unease. And that was the most dangerous part, because unease does not demand action. It only asks you to pay attention. And I was still trying very hard not to. There is a moment before rejection that feels strangely calm. Nothing has happened yet. Everything still looks the same. And that is what makes it so dangerous. I remember that morning clearly. The house was quiet, not tense, not heavy, just ordinary. I was standing in the kitchen holding my phone, scrolling through the final travel details. Train times, platform numbers, the weather forecast in Scotland, rain, cloud, clear spells. I was thinking about shoes, about whether I should pack an extra jumper, about small things that suddenly felt important. Behind me, I heard my husband move, the sound of a chair, the soft scrape of it against the floor. He did not clear his throat. He did not sigh. He spoke as if he were about to comment on the news. I spoke to Mum this morning. I turned slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge him. Right, I said. There was a pause, a careful one. Then he continued. She thinks it might be better if you don't come. The words landed gently, too gently. No emphasis, no apology, no explanation. Just a suggestion, offered as if it were practical advice. For a second I did not understand what he had said. My mind tried to rearrange the sentence, to soften it, to make it mean something else. Better if I don't come. I waited for more, for context, for a reason. None arrived. The kettle clicked off. The silence felt louder than before. I looked at him then. Really looked. He was not angry. He was not uncomfortable. He looked relieved, as if he had finally passed something over to me, as if the difficult part was done. I asked one question, only one. Why? He did not answer straight away. He looked down, adjusted his sleeve. It's just easier. She thinks it will be less awkward. Less awkward, not wrong, not unfair, just awkward. In that moment, I felt something detach inside me. Not heartbreak, not rage, disbelief. I realized that this conversation had already happened, not just once, but several times. Decisions had been made, opinions agreed upon, and I was being informed at the end. I stood there holding my phone, suddenly aware of how ridiculous it looked. All those details, all that preparation. I had booked the tickets. I had paid for the accommodation. I had organized everything, so no one else had to think. And now I was being removed from my own arrangements, quietly, politely, like an item that no longer fit the plan. I asked him if this was what he wanted. He hesitated, then said, I just don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Anyone. Not me. I nodded, because my body knew what my mind was still processing. This was not about the trip. It was about space, about who belonged, and who could be set aside without consequence. I felt the weight of something I had never named before. I was not being excluded because I had done something wrong. I was being excluded because I was convenient, because I would understand, because I would not make a scene, because I would absorb the decision quietly. And they were right. I did not shout, I did not argue, I did not ask him to choose. I simply said, okay. The word surprised even me. He exhaled, a long breath, as if he had been holding it in. Thank you, he said softly. That was when the pain arrived, not sharp, not dramatic, but deep, because gratitude does not belong in moments like this. I walked back to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the open suitcase, clothes folded carefully, shoes lined up, everything ready, except me. I felt erased, not rejected with anger, but edited out, as if my presence had been reviewed and deemed unnecessary. I thought about the family group chat, about the messages I had read, the plans I had heard second-hand. And suddenly they made sense. This was not sudden. This was simply the moment it was said out loud. I closed the suitcase, slowly, deliberately, not in defeat, in clarity, because something else was becoming clear too. If they could remove me this easily, they had never really made space for me in the first place. Before we continue, comment number 4 below if you have ever been told to step aside for the sake of peace and stay with me. Because what I did next was quiet, but it changed everything. The most dangerous moment is not when everything breaks, it is when nothing breaks at all. After he told me not to come, I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not call anyone. I made tea. That is what surprised me later. How ordinary my movements were. I placed the kettle back on its base. I rinsed the cup. I stood by the window and watched the street below. People were still going to work. A bus passed. Someone laughed on the pavement. The world had not noticed that something had ended. Inside me, something had shifted. But it did not collapse. It organized itself. I did not confront my husband again. There was nothing left to say. Anything spoken in that moment would have been emotional, and emotion would have given him something to react to. I did not want reaction. I wanted clarity. So I stayed quiet. I moved through the house carefully, not slowly, not urgently, carefully. I noticed how silence changed the space between us, how he looked at me when I did not fill the gaps, how often he waited for me to speak first. I did not. That evening, he asked if I was okay, casually, as if checking the weather. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "I'm fine." The words were true, in a way he could not see yet. That night, I slept, deeply, without replaying the conversation. When I woke up, the decision was not dramatic. It was complete. I did not rush to cancel anything. I did not make calls. I did not send messages. I reviewed. I opened my laptop, logged into accounts, checked details, not with anger, with precision. I looked at the bookings, the payments, the names attached to each reservation. I noticed what was mine and what was not. That distinction had never mattered to me before. Now it mattered. I realized something else in that quiet space. If they had asked me to step aside, they had already assumed I would. They believed I would accept it, that I would absorb the discomfort, that I would make things easier for everyone else. They were used to that version of me. I did not plan to announce my absence. I did not plan to explain myself. Explanation is a form of negotiation, and I was no longer negotiating my place. Instead, I waited. Not passively, intentionally. I let the day pass as normal, answered work emails, completed tasks, attended meetings. No one noticed anything unusual. That was the point. When my husband spoke to me, I responded politely, briefly, without warmth or distance, just neutral. He seemed unsure, as if expecting a delayed reaction. It did not come. The silence did something interesting. It created space, and in that space I could see clearly. I saw how often decisions had been made without me, how often I had been included only when needed, how easily my role could be reduced to convenience. That clarity did not hurt. It focused me. I stopped thinking about fairness. I started thinking about structure. What existed? What was assumed? What could be changed quietly? I understood then that power does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as permission, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop giving it. I did not feel angry. Anger would have burned out too quickly. I felt calm, and that calm stayed with me. By the second day, my husband noticed the shift. He asked if I wanted to talk. "Whenever you're ready," I smiled. "There's nothing to talk about." That unsettled him, because people who are about to forgive usually talk. People who are about to protest usually raise their voice. I was doing neither. I was counting time, options, consequences. And I was no longer thinking like a wife who had been hurt. I was thinking like someone who had just discovered that her investment was no longer aligned with her future. If you are listening and wondering when she breaks, this is not that moment. This is the moment before action, the pause before movement, the breath held deliberately. Before we go on, comment number 5 below if you can feel the shift happening, because what comes next does not happen in anger. It happens with intent. Money does not announce itself when it leaves. It simply stops working. That was the principle I followed. I did not make a list. I did not rehearse explanations. I did not prepare speeches. I opened my laptop and treated the situation the way I treated work. As a set of accounts, as a structure, as numbers that either aligned or did not. I started with the obvious. The bookings, the transfers, the deposits. I checked each one carefully, not to undo everything, just to understand where the responsibility actually sat. Names matter in moments like this, so do permissions. I noticed how many arrangements were under my name, how many payments were authorized by my card, how many confirmations were addressed to me directly. It was more than I had realized. That awareness did not make me angry. It made me precise. I cancelled nothing at first. I paused. Then I reviewed the access, the shared card, the secondary permissions, the standing authorizations that had been set up quietly over time. I disabled what I no longer wished to support, not dramatically, not all at once. One permission, then another. I watched the confirmations arrive, brief, neutral, automated. There was something grounding about that. No judgment, no emotion, just systems responding to instruction. I moved slowly, deliberately. I did not want confusion. I wanted clarity. I made sure every change could be traced, every action reasonable, every step defensible, because this was not punishment. It was correction. I was not taking anything away. I was removing myself. By midday, the structure looked different. The numbers still existed, but they were no longer connected to me. That afternoon, my husband asked a question, casually. "Did you change something with the card?" I looked up from my screen. Yes, that was all. He waited, as if expecting more. There was nothing more to give. He nodded slowly. Okay. The word did not carry relief. It carried uncertainty. Later that evening, I saw it from the other side. His mother was standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, reading something, frowning slightly. She did not raise her voice. She did not call my name. She simply said, "That's odd." My husband looked at her. "What?" "The payment didn't go through." There was a pause, not panic, not accusation, confusion. She tried again, then looked at him. "You should check with her." He glanced in my direction. I was in the living room, not hiding, not listening deliberately, just present. He did not call me over. He did not ask directly. He went quiet. That silence told me everything, because when money has always worked quietly in the background, its absence feels like a fault in the system. And systems do not shout. They fail politely. Later, he approached me. "Some things didn't process today." I kept my voice even. "I'm aware." Another pause. "Can we talk about it?" I considered the question, then said, "There's nothing urgent to discuss." That was true. Nothing was urgent for me anymore. I had not frozen accounts. I had not created chaos. I had simply returned responsibility to where it belonged. The effect was subtle, but immediate. Plans that assumed my contribution stalled. Decisions that relied on my approval paused, not because I had blocked them, but because they could no longer move without me. I noticed how quickly the tone changed. Questions became careful. Requests became indirect. Not angry, not confrontational, just uncertain. And uncertainty does something interesting. It exposes assumptions. I could see them adjusting, recalculating, trying to understand where the structure had shifted. I did not explain. Explanation invites negotiation. I did not negotiate. I continued with my day. Work emails, deadlines, meetings. From the outside, nothing had happened. Inside the house, something fundamental had changed. I had removed the quiet guarantee, the safety net no one acknowledged until it disappeared. And I felt no rush of triumph, no satisfaction, only a steady calm. Because this was not revenge. It was alignment. I had not acted out of anger. I had acted out of clarity. And clarity has a way of unsettling people who relied on your silence. If you are listening and expecting fireworks, this is not that moment. This is the moment before they realize that things will not return to how they were. Before we continue, comment number 6 below if you understand the power of quiet boundaries, because this was only the first adjustment, and it was enough to change the balance. I did not tell anyone I was still going. There was no announcement, no explanation, no message sent to clarify intentions. I simply adjusted what was already mine. The booking remained, the date stayed the same. Only one detail changed. The number of people. I noticed how easy it was. A few clicks, a confirmation, an updated email, no questions asked. That was when I understood something important. The trip had never belonged to the family. It had belonged to whoever held it together, and that had always been me. I packed lightly, not because I wanted to escape, but because I no longer felt the need to prepare for anyone else. When I left the house, it was early. The street was quiet, the air cool. I locked the door behind me, once. On the train, I chose a window seat. Not deliberately. It was simply available. London slipped away without drama. Stations passed. Fields replaced buildings. I did not listen to music. I did not read. I watched. There was something about movement without obligation that felt unfamiliar, as if my body was learning a new rhythm. By the time we crossed into Scotland, the light had changed. Softer, more patient. The sky felt wider. The silence heavier, in a good way. I arrived without hurry, collected the keys, drove slowly. The road curved. The lock appeared suddenly, still. Unimpressed by my arrival, the house was exactly as I remembered, wooden, unassuming, quiet. No one else's voice echoed inside. No schedule waited to be managed. I placed my bag down and stood still, longer than necessary. There was no rush to unpack, no need to make plans. I opened a window. Cold air entered. Clean. That night, I slept without thinking about anyone else's comfort, without listening for footsteps, without preparing explanations for the morning. When I woke, the house was silent, not empty, just peaceful. I made coffee, sat by the window, watched mist lift slowly from the water. Time moved differently there. Not faster, not slower, just honestly. I did not do much. I walked, I sat, I ate when I was hungry. I noticed things I had forgotten how to notice. The sound of wind against wood, the way light shifted across the floor. There was no tension to manage, no expressions to read, no atmosphere to preserve. And in that absence, something else became clear. This was not indulgence. It was restoration. I was not running away. I was returning. To myself, to the version of me that did not organize or anticipate or soften edges. I received messages, a few, careful. Are you there yet? Everything okay? I did not respond immediately, not out of spite, out of presence. When I did reply, it was brief. I'm settled, that was enough. I spent one afternoon by the lock, wrapped in a coat, hands in pockets. The water did not react to me, the land did not adjust. It existed, unchanged. And for the first time in a long while, so did I. I thought about how often my role had been to make things smooth, to remove friction, to carry weight quietly. Here, nothing asked that of me. The house did not care who paid. The landscape did not care who belonged. It welcomed me without conditions. That contrast was striking. Back home, space had always come with expectations. Here, space simply existed. I realized then that this was the second adjustment, not financial, structural. I had stepped into ownership, not of property, but of experience. The trip was no longer something I provided. It was something I inhabited. And that changed how I saw everything else. When evening came, I lit a small fire, not for warmth, for presence. I sat with a book I did not read, watched the flames move, thought without forcing conclusions. There was no triumph in this, no sense of victory, only alignment. I had not taken something from them. I had stopped giving it away. If you are listening and feeling a quiet relief right now, that is intentional, because this part is not about loss, it is about contrast. Before we continue, comment number 7 below if you understand the power of choosing yourself without asking permission, because what followed was not louder, but it was irreversible. I was not there when it began. That mattered, because when things fall apart publicly, they reveal themselves more clearly without witnesses who explain. The family had arrived. The setting was exactly as planned. A table set too carefully, conversations arranged into polite shapes, smiles that appeared on time. From the outside, it looked intact. Inside, something was missing. It began with small disruptions, questions without answers, assumptions that no longer held. Someone asked about the booking. Another mentioned a payment. A third checked their phone, frowning slightly. Nothing dramatic. Just friction. My husband moved between people quietly, attempting to smooth things over. He reassured, deflected, promised to look into it. He was calm, until he was not, because calm requires support, and the support he expected was not there. His mother noticed first, not with anger, with irritation. She had always been confident in systems, in how things worked, in how arrangements resolved themselves. This time, they did not. She asked questions, short ones, then repeated them. Her tone sharpened slightly. Why had something not gone through? Why a detail had changed? Why there was no confirmation where she expected one? No one answered her directly. They looked at my husband. He hesitated. That hesitation spread. People exchanged glances. Someone excused themselves to make a call. Another suggested waiting. Waiting for whom? That was the question no one asked out loud, because asking it would have named the absence. My husband tried to keep things moving, to redirect attention, to adjust plans on the spot. But improvisation exposed what planning had concealed. The structure depended on something constant, something reliable, something that had always been there. When it was not, the structure showed its weakness. Voices lowered, smiles became fixed. The room filled with a particular kind of discomfort, the kind that comes from pretending nothing is wrong while knowing everyone can feel it. His mother attempted control. She corrected people, issued instructions, reminded them of how things were meant to be. But control without leverage sounds hollow. Her confidence began to fray. She repeated herself. Her sentences became longer, less certain. Someone finally asked, "Has she confirmed?" No name was needed. The silence that followed was unmistakable. My husband answered too quickly, then corrected himself. He offered explanations that did not align, timelines that shifted, reasons that felt rehearsed. The effect was immediate. People stopped asking questions, not because they were satisfied, because they understood. Understanding does not always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it arrives with resignation. The gathering continued. Technically, but the tone had changed. There was no confrontation, no raised voices. Just a slow recognition that something essential had been assumed rather than secured. Later, messages arrived. Not to me, about me, careful, indirect. Is everything all right? Has there been a misunderstanding? I did not respond. Silence has weight in public spaces. It leaves room for interpretation, and interpretation does the work for you. By the end of the evening, the narrative had shifted. Not dramatically, but decisively. What had once been framed as generosity was now discussed as dependency. What had been taken for granted was now questioned. And what had been dismissed as convenience was recognized as structure. I remained absent. That absence did more than presence ever could, because without me there to absorb discomfort, it had nowhere to go. It settled. It lingered. It exposed. The next day my husband called, once, then again. I did not answer immediately. When I did, my voice was calm. There's nothing to explain. That was true. The collapse had already occurred, publicly, quietly, without spectacle, no one accused, no one defended. They simply adjusted their understanding, and understanding, once it shifts, rarely returns to its original shape. If you are listening and expecting a final confrontation, this is not that story. This is what happens when systems fail in front of witnesses, when roles are revealed not by argument, but by absence. Before we finish, comment number 8 below if you recognize this kind of ending, because the most complete victories do not need applause. They only need to be seen. The conversation did not happen immediately. That too mattered. People often imagine confrontations as explosive. Raised voices, long speeches, tears. This was none of that. It happened days later, after the confusion had settled, after explanations had failed, after the absence had done its work. My husband asked to talk, not urgently, carefully. When you're back, he said, if you have time. I did not rush. I did not delay on purpose. I chose a neutral place, public, quiet. He arrived early, sat with his hands folded. He looked smaller than I remembered. We did not hug. He spoke first. I didn't expect it to unfold like that. I nodded. I know. He paused, waited. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No, I said, there hasn't. That stopped him. He tried again. You could have said something. I looked at him. I did. He frowned slightly. When? When I stepped aside. Silence. He shifted in his seat. I didn't think you meant all of it. I kept my voice even. That's because you never thought I would stop. He swallowed. My mum feels embarrassed, he said. People are talking. I did not react. She thinks it was unnecessary. I disagree. Another pause. You've made things difficult, he said quietly. I met his eyes. I removed myself. He exhaled. Long, tired. You didn't have to do it like this. I did. That was the truth, and it did not require defense. He looked down, then up again. Are you leaving me? The question was almost hopeful, as if an answer might restore order. I already did, I said, just not loudly. That was when something in his expression changed. Not anger, not shock, recognition. He realized that nothing was about to be negotiated. Nothing would be softened. Nothing would be handed back. He tried one last thing. We're family, he said. I waited. Let the word settle. Family doesn't erase accountability, I replied. He nodded slowly, as if filing that sentence away. Too late. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, people talked, laughed, lived. Eventually he stood. I hope you're happy, he said. I considered the word, then answered, I'm aligned. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever could. After that, things resolved themselves, not dramatically, predictably. Without my presence, the structure collapsed inward. Responsibilities redistributed. Tensions surfaced. His mother became quieter, less directive, because authority without leverage cannot sustain itself. My husband became defensive, then tired, then resigned. There were no apologies. There did not need to be. Karma is not always loud. Sometimes it is structural. It arrives when people are forced to carry what they once outsourced. When they face the weight of choices they believed belonged to someone else. I did not watch closely. I did not need to. My life moved forward, not faster, not slower, just forward. I changed my routines, my spaces, my assumptions. There was grief. Of course there was. But it was clean. Not tangled in regret, not poisoned by doubt, because I had not acted out of spite. I had acted out of truth, and truth has a stabilizing effect. The last message I received was brief. "I understand now," he wrote. I did not reply. Understanding does not require acknowledgement, only adjustment. If you are listening and waiting for vengeance, this is not that ending. This is what closure looks like when no one needs to be convinced. Before we finish, comment number 9 below if you believe that karma does not chase. It waits, and when it arrives, it does not shout. It simply stays. Freedom did not arrive with celebration. There were no dramatic changes, no sudden reinvention, no applause. It arrived quietly, in small moments, in ordinary decisions, in the absence of pressure. After everything ended, my life did not become lighter overnight, but it became clearer. I woke up without anticipating anyone else's mood. I made plans without calculating who might be disappointed. I chose silence without fearing what it would be mistaken for. That was new. I noticed how much energy I had spent managing other people's comfort. How often I had adjusted myself to preserve peace that was never equally shared. When that stopped, something unexpected happened. Time slowed. Not because there was less to do, but because there was less to carry. I began to understand that freedom is not about leaving. It is about no longer being required to explain your presence. I walked more, not to escape, but to notice the sound of footsteps, the rhythm of breath, the way thoughts settle when they are not interrupted. I spent evenings alone without calling it loneliness, because loneliness implies absence, and what I felt was presence. I did not replace what I had lost. I did not look for something to fill the space. I let the space exist. There is a difference. When people ask how I am now, I do not give long answers. I say, I am well. Not happy in the way films describe, not healed in a way that promises permanence, just aligned. Alignment does not shout, it does not prove itself, it holds. I learned that boundaries do not need to be loud to be effective. They only need to be consistent. And consistency is something you can only offer when you are no longer afraid of withdrawal. The hardest part was accepting that love is not measured by endurance, that loyalty does not require self-erasure, that sacrifice without recognition is not virtue, it is habit, and habits can be changed. I do not regret what I gave. It shaped me. It taught me precision, resilience, patience. But I do not mistake giving for belonging anymore. Belonging does not ask you to disappear. It meets you where you are, and stays. If there is one thing this experience left me with, it is this understanding. Sometimes the most expensive thing you gain is freedom. Not freedom from people, but freedom from roles you never agreed to play. Freedom from assumptions made in your silence. Freedom from being necessary in ways that cost you yourself. That freedom is quiet, but it is permanent, and it does not need permission. If this story resonated with you, take a moment before the next video begins. Ask yourself where you are still explaining your worth, where you are still carrying what was never yours to hold. And if you feel ready, leave a comment with the word free, or tell me where you are listening from, not to perform, not to be seen, but to acknowledge, even briefly, that you deserve space that does not ask you to shrink. Thank you for staying.